Okay, so we've talked about the anatomy of the skeletal muscle. Now let's talk about the physiology. We've been kind of hinting towards it as we've talked about the parts, but when a muscle contracts, what happens is the actin and the myosin slide across each other. Myosin actually grabs the actin and with a power stroke pulls it towards the M line. And so the whole muscle appears to shorten because the distance between the two Z discs shortens, but nothing, the myofibrils or the myofilaments don't really change in size. So during a contraction, the thin filament slides past the thick filament, so the overlapping increases. This would be a muscle that is not contracted, and this is a muscle that is contracted. And you'll notice that the distance between the Z line has shortened. There is really no H zone anymore. The I band is a lot more narrow as well. So the myosin reaches up and grabs the actin and slides it across. So let's put what we just saw in the movie into steps in our notes. The first thing that's going to happen when a muscle contracts is that you're going to get a message from the nerve. Now, if you read your book, you know that contraction coupling is the second step. The first step is at the neuromuscular junction, what actually happens when the nerve talks to the muscle. We're going to do that second. We're going to talk about just what happens in the muscle after the nerve impulse is received. It's really phase 2, called the excitation contraction coupling. So when the nerve impulse travels along the sarcolemma and goes down into the T-tubules, it opens up channels, calcium channels. So calcium that is in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, remember these are either lateral or terminal cisternae, are released into the muscle cell. So let's see what happens when the calcium is released into the muscle cell. So let's put that in the notes. When the nerve impulse travels down the T tubules, it causes the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Calcium binds to the troponin, which would be like this little gold bead, and that causes that heavy attachment causes the chain or the tropomyosin to slide down, and once it slides down, now you can see that the binding sites are exposed on actin, and since the myosin head has already been activated by ATP in the cocked position, it's going to attach to the actin and pull the actin towards the M line. So it attaches to the actin and pulls with a power stroke to slide the actin towards the M line. It also, when it does this power stroke, releases ADP and inorganic phosphate. So now that ATP binding site is ready to receive another ATP. A new ATP binds to the myosin head, causing the bond between the actin and the myosin to loosen and detach. ATPase, that it was also on that myosin head, converts ATP to ADP and phosphate, releases energy, and the myosin head becomes cocked again. And as long as you have ATP and calcium, then the muscle will continue to contract. And know that we have hundreds of these myosin heads and that they're all not attaching and detaching at the same time. So they're working together to keep that muscle contraction smooth and sustained. So here you see a muscle that's not contracted. Here you see one that's contracted. Myosin reached up and pulled the actin towards the M line. Relaxed, contracted. Relaxed, contracted. So what caused this to be, this muscle to be excited? Let's look at what your book calls phase 1 at the neuromuscular junction. This is showing a muscle fiber or cell, and you can see that this nerve is innervating it. It's going to innervate it at the belly, and it's going to actually branch into axon terminals. So each muscle is served by one motor nerve, which contains hundreds of motor neuron axons. The axon enters the muscle at several axonal terminals at a neuromuscular junction. So where the nerve meets the muscle is called the neuromuscular junction. Let's zoom in on that. We're going to zoom in on that in just a moment. A motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it supplies is called a motor unit. So this nerve right here, this one right here, is innervating this fiber and this fiber. So these two fibers and this nerve together are a motor unit. Over here, this is the second motor unit, and notice it's innervating 3. Very fine actions are going to have small motor units, only innervating a few nerve muscle fibers, but very like strong, like running, less precise movements are going to have large motor units where the axon branches extensively and it attaches to, hundreds of muscle fibers. At the neuromuscular junction, this is usually in the middle of the fiber. That includes the end of the axon and the muscle fiber. Now we say the neuromuscular junction, and we say this is where two excitable cells meet, but actually they don't come in direct contact with each other. There is a small space between the two called the synaptic cleft. So we say excitable cells meet at the synapse. And I always think of snapping my fingers. If my two fingers were really attached to each other, they couldn't slide past each other and give me the snap. So where two excitable cells meet is a synapse. And so we're going to zoom in on that synaptic area. This would be the axon terminal of the nerve, and this would be the motor end plate of the muscle. And so we're going to see in a moment how the message gets from the nerve to the muscle. The axon end has several, inside of the axon bulb, there are several synaptic vesicles, and inside the synaptic vesicles there's a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and it's shown by these little green balls. The muscle fiber is very folded and has these little receptors for acetylcholine. So the muscle fiber or the motor end plate is highly folded. Remember, taking a given space, dividing it into smaller pieces increases surface area, and it contains several or millions of acetylcholine receptors.